For 42 years, I managed the finances of millionaires while living on a modest salary. Every investment I guided, every fortune I helped build, every financial crisis I navigated my clients through, all while denying myself even small luxuries so my family could have the best of everything. I gave my children and grandchildren everything I had. But when I turned 78, they decided I was a burden and deposited me in Sunny Pines retirement home without a second thought. What my grandchildren didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Was that beneath my simple appearance and careful spending habits lay a fortune that would make their eyes water. My former client, Walter Montgomery, hadn't just been the wealthiest man in Westlake. He'd been my secret benefactor, leaving me with an inheritance that would change everything. And sitting in that sterile nursing home room, listening to my grandson James explain why this was really the best option for everyone, I made a decision. That would shock them all. It was time to stop giving. It was time to finally live for myself. I never planned to work in financial management for over 4 decades. When I first took the job at Montgomery Investments, it was supposed to be temporary, just something to keep us afloat after my husband Richard died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving me alone with 8-year-old twins, Margaret and Michael. But temporary turned into permanent, and before I knew it, a lifetime had passed. Walter Montgomery wasn't just my employer. He became a dear friend and mentor. He saw how hard I worked to provide for my children, how I clipped coupons religiously to save for their college funds, how I took on extra clients on weekends to afford the sports camps and music lessons they needed. He watched me age at that desk, my hair turning from auburn to silver, my hands growing more veined with each passing year. "Evelyn," he'd tell me, leaning against my office doorway with his signature red suspenders and knowing smile, "You're the backbone of this company. I couldn't have built half of what I have without you." I'd smile and wave him off, but those words meant everything to me. In a world where women in finance were often invisible, especially those who began as secretaries like I did, Walter saw me. When my twins graduated from college and launched their careers, I thought my heart might burst with pride. I'd done it. I'd given them everything they needed to succeed in life. Margaret became a successful surgeon, married to a university professor. Michael went into corporate law, marrying his college sweetheart. Between them, they gave me 4 wonderful grandchildren, James and Sophia from Margaret, Emma and Tyler from Michael. As they built their own families in different cities, I continued working, saving, and investing small amounts when I could. I lived in the same 3-bedroom house I'd shared with Richard, driving the same reliable sedan for 15 years, never seeing a reason to upgrade when everything functioned perfectly well. "Mom," Margaret told me during a rare visit when she was in her 40s, "you should think about downsizing soon. We've found a lovely retirement community just 20 minutes from our place. You could have your own little apartment and we'd be close enough to visit regularly." I'd smiled, touched by what I thought was thoughtfulness, by the gratitude I believed my children felt. But then Walter died. It was unexpected, a stroke while on vacation in the Maldives. At the funeral, I stood in the back, my black dress hanging loose on my frame. I'd lost weight from the stress, from the grief. He'd been more than a boss to me. He'd been my rock, a connection to a world of possibilities I'd only glimpsed. 2 weeks later, Harriet Chen, Walter's attorney, called me into her office. "Evelyn," she said, placing her hands flat on the desk between us, "I have something important to discuss with you." I nodded, assuming it was about the transition of the company to Walter's nephew, perhaps some paperwork that needed my signature as the longest-serving employee. Walter left explicit instructions in his will. In addition to a significant portion of his personal investments, his controlling shares in Montgomery Investments are being transferred to you. I stared at her, uncomprehending. How much? I finally managed to ask. Harriet slid a document across the desk. I looked down at the number and felt the room spin. $24 million. He left a letter for you as well, Harriet said, handing me an envelope. With trembling fingers, I opened it and began to read. My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, I've left this world behind. Don't grieve too much for me. I've lived a good life, made richer by knowing you. For 42 years, I've watched you sacrifice everything for your family. I've seen your dedication, your unwavering love, your selflessness. I've also seen how little you've reserved for yourself. How many dreams you've set aside. Consider this my final investment advice. Invest in yourself, Evelyn. I want you to live. Really live. Travel to those destinations in the dog-eared travel magazines I've seen you hide in your desk drawer. Wear silk instead of polyester. Indulge. In those small pleasures you've denied yourself all these years. You've earned every penny of this inheritance not just through your exceptional work, but through the exceptional human being you've always been. My only regret is that I won't be there to see you finally spread your wings. With deepest affection and respect, Walter, tears streamed down my face as I finished reading. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my purse. It was too much to process all at once. The funds have already been transferred to accounts in your name, Harriet explained. Walter set everything up months ago. You're a wealthy woman, Evelyn. I nodded, still dazed. I need time to think. That evening, I sat alone in my modest living room, the same one where I'd raised my children, where I'd helped my grandchildren, with homework during their visits. I stared at the banking app on my tablet, at the string of zeros that had appeared in my account balance. It didn't seem real. I decided not to tell Margaret and Michael right away. I wanted to process this change, in my circumstances first, to make plans. Besides, the holidays were coming up in a few months. I'd surprise them then, perhaps offer to help with the grandchildren's college funds, or take the whole family on a vacation, something I'd never been able to do before. But first, I needed to retire. At 78, I'd given enough of my life to work. It was time to follow Walter's advice and live for myself. The opportunity to tell my children about my retirement came sooner than expected. Margaret called the following weekend, her voice tight with what I recognized as her managing a situation tone. Mom, we need to talk about your living situation. Michael and I have been discussing it, and we think it's time to consider some options. Could we come visit next Saturday? All of us, including James and Sophia? Something in her voice made me uneasy, but I agreed. Of course, dear. I'd love to see everyone. I spent the week preparing for their visit, shopping for my grandchildren's favorite snacks, making sure the house was spotless. Part of me considered telling them about the inheritance immediately, but another part, the part that had spent decades observing wealthy families and their dynamics, counseled patience. I wanted to see what Margaret had in mind without the complication of my new financial status. They arrived as a unit, Margaret and her husband Paul, my grandson James and granddaughter Sophia. James was now 27, working at the same hospital as his mother, while Sophia at 24 had just finished law school. Both had been rare visitors in recent years, always too busy with their careers and social lives. Michael had called to say he couldn't make it from Boston, but supported whatever Margaret thought best. The house looks the same as always, Margaret commented as she walked through the living room, running a finger over the mantel as if checking for dust. Don't you find it a bit much to maintain at your age? It keeps me active, I replied mildly, setting out coffee and the homemade cookies I knew Sophia loved. How's the hospital, James? Still enjoying residency? James, handsome in an expensive sweater I couldn't have afforded to give him just months earlier, gave me a distracted smile. It's fine, Grandma. Busy. Listen, Mom says you've been forgetting things lately. I stared at him, then at Margaret. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I beg your pardon? Margaret sat down, arranging herself carefully on my old sofa. Mrs. Delaney next door called me. She said she found you wandering in your bathrobe at 3 p.m. last Tuesday, apparently. Confused about what day it was. The accusation was so absurd I almost laughed. That never happened. I haven't spoken to Mrs. Delaney in weeks. Mom, Margaret said with exaggerated patience, it's okay. Memory issues are normal at your age, but it's why we're here. We're concerned about your safety. Paul, who had always treated me with a sort of detached politeness, cleared his throat. Evelyn, we've been researching facilities that could provide the level of care you're beginning to need. Facilities? I repeated, a chill running through me. Sunny Pines Retirement Home, Sophia supplied, finally looking up from her phone. It's really nice, Grandma. They have activities and nurses on staff 24/7. I don't need nurses, I said firmly. There's nothing wrong with my memory. Mrs. Delaney must have confused me with someone else. I was actually at the office last Tuesday afternoon. A silence fell over the room. Margaret and James exchanged a look that made my heart sink. That's part of what we wanted to discuss, Margaret said gently. You've been retired for 3 years, Mom. I stared at her, genuinely shocked. What are you talking about? I was just at Montgomery Investments on Tuesday. Ask Walter. Walter Montgomery died 4 years ago, James interrupted, his voice carrying the same professional sympathy he probably used with patients. You attended his funeral, remember? For a moment, I felt dizzy. Had I imagined my meeting with Harriet Chen? The inheritance? I reached for my purse, feeling for Walter's letter. It was there, real under my fingertips. I think you're confused, I said slowly. I've been working part-time since Walter's death. I've never formally retired. Margaret sighed, reaching for a folder she'd placed on the coffee table. Mom, I have your retirement paperwork right here. You signed it 3 years ago when you had that bout of pneumonia. Montgomery Investments has been sending your pension checks ever since. She handed me the folder. Inside were indeed retirement documents with what appeared to be my signature, but I knew I hadn't signed them. I'd never seen these papers before. These are forged, I said, my voice sharper than intended. I never signed these. Paul made a small sound of dismay. This is worse than we thought. Paranoia along with the memory issues. I'm not paranoid, I protested, but even to my ears it sounded exactly like what someone suffering paranoia would say. Mom? Margaret leaned forward, taking my hands in hers. This is why we're worried. You have periods of confusion where you forget important events. You think people are conspiring against you. Mrs. Delaney said she's seen you talking to yourself in the garden. I pulled my hands away. I was on my phone with a client, using my earbuds. Sophia looked up from her device long enough to give me a patronizing smile. Grandma, you don't have clients anymore. And when was the last time you used earbuds? The conversation was becoming surreal. I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. I want you all to leave, I said quietly. I'm perfectly fine, and I have no intention of moving to any retirement home. We thought you might resist, Margaret said, nodding at James, who produced another folder. That's why we brought these. Inside this folder were medical evaluations I had no memory of undergoing and legal documents declaring me incapable of managing my own affairs. Margaret had been named my guardian. This can't be legal, I whispered, leafing through papers that effectively stripped me of my autonomy. I never agreed to this. You did, Mom, Margaret insisted. You just don't remember. You had a series of small strokes last year. The doctors said this kind of memory loss and confusion would be common. I looked from face to face. My daughter, my grandchildren, even Paul, seeking some acknowledgement that this was all a terrible mistake. Instead, I saw only determination wrapped in a thin veneer of concern. We've already made the arrangements, Margaret continued, seemingly encouraged by my silence. Sunny Pines has a lovely room ready for you. Sophia has agreed to move in here temporarily while we decide whether to sell the house or rent it out. Sell? My house? I found my voice again. Absolutely not! It's too much for you to maintain, Margaret repeated. And the proceeds can help cover the costs of Sunny Pines. It's quite expensive, you know. What about my pension? I asked, still trying to navigate this nightmare. You said Montgomery Investments has been sending checks. It's not enough, Paul interjected. Not for the level of care you need. The house equity will help bridge the gap. I suddenly understood with perfect clarity. This wasn't about my health or my memory. This was about my house, mortgage-free in one of the city's now desirable older neighborhoods, and accessing my pension. I won't go, I stated, standing. This is my home. I'm staying here. James stood as well, towering over me. When had my grandson gotten so tall? So intimidating? Grandma, he said, the professional sympathy now tinged with firmness. You don't have a choice. Mom has legal guardianship. It's for your own good. They gave me 1 week to pack. 1 week. To decide which fragments of my 78 years should accompany me to a room that, according to the brochure Margaret left behind, measured exactly 320 square feet. A single bed, a nightstand, a small desk, and a bathroom with handrails by the toilet. This was to be my world now. I spent the first day in shock, moving through my house like a ghost, touching familiar objects. The reading lamp Richard had, given me on our 5th anniversary, the clay handprints my children had made in elementary school, the collection of antique investment books Walter had gifted me over the years. How could I choose? By the second day, anger had replaced shock. I called 3 attorneys, but when I explained my situation, each one gently suggested I might discuss my concerns with my family or consider what's best for my health. One even called Margaret, after our consultation, expressing concern about my mental state. The betrayal left me reeling. On the 3rd day, I remembered Walter's inheritance. I waited until midnight, when I was certain no one was watching my house. Margaret had been stopping by each day to help with the packing, but really to monitor my compliance. Once I was sure I was alone, I opened my laptop and navigated to the private banking site Harriet had set up for me. The accounts were still there, still real, still mine. Relief washed over me so intensely I nearly wept. I wasn't imagining things. Walter had left me his fortune, just as I remembered. But that raised a troubling question. Why was Margaret so convinced I had retired years ago? Why the elaborate fiction about memory problems and strokes? I called Harriet Chen first thing in the morning. Evelyn, she answered warmly. How are you settling into your new financial situation? Have you started those travels Walter always wanted for you? Her friendly greeting confirmed I wasn't delusional. Harriet, I need your help. My daughter seems to believe I retired from Montgomery. Investments 3 years ago. She has documents with my signature that I never signed. A pause. That's concerning. As far as I know, you were working part-time until Walter's passing 6 weeks ago. You oversaw the transition to his nephew while we arranged the inheritance transfer. Exactly, I exclaimed, relief flooding through me again. But Margaret has guardianship papers. They're moving me to a nursing home next week and selling my house. Harriet's tone changed instantly from warm to professional. Evelyn, I need you to scan and send me every document they've shown you. This sounds like elder fraud. I'll have our firm's best elder law specialist call you within the hour. Within 3 hours, I had answers. Answers that broke my heart but steeled my resolve. Charles Livingston, the elder law attorney, was blunt after reviewing the documents. These are sophisticated forgeries. The medical evaluations are from a doctor who lost his license last year for falsifying cognitive assessments. The guardianship papers were filed in a county where you don't reside, which is why you never received a court notice." He paused. "Mrs. Ellis, has your family recently become aware of any changes in your financial situation?" I thought carefully. "I haven't told them about my inheritance, if that's what you're asking. But Margaret has always handled my tax returns as a favor. She might have seen something." "That would explain it," Charles said grimly. "Montgomery Investments would have issued documents related to your change in ownership status. If she saw those, she might have realized something substantial was coming your way. But to fabricate memory problems? To put me in a home? The betrayal was almost incomprehensible. Unfortunately, we see this more often than you'd think. The question now is how you want to proceed. We can fight the guardianship, press charges for the forgeries." "No," I interrupted, an idea forming. "I want to do something else entirely." Charles listened as I outlined my plan. When I finished, he was silent for a moment. "It's unorthodox," he finally said, "but legal, and perhaps the most effective lesson they could learn." By the time Margaret and James arrived on moving day, I had everything prepared. My essential belongings were packed in 2 modest suitcases. I had signed the papers Charles had prepared. Most importantly, I had made peace with my decision. "You're being very reasonable about this," Margaret commented as James carried my suitcases to the car. "I'm glad you've come to understand it's for the best." I smiled thinly. "I've had time to think about it. You're right. At my age, I should be in a place where I'm looked after." She seemed startled by my acquiescence but quickly recovered. "Exactly, and we'll visit often, I promise." "I'm sure you will," I replied, knowing they would visit exactly as often as they had these past 5 years, on major holidays, if I was lucky. Sunny Pines was exactly as the brochure had depicted. Beige walls, beige carpets, beige furniture, with only the occasional splash of institutional blue to break the monotony. The staff spoke loudly and slowly, as if volume could compensate for the dignity they stripped from their residents. My room was on the 2nd floor, overlooking the parking lot rather than the advertised garden views. Margaret didn't seem to notice the discrepancy as the administrator, Miss Patel, showed us around. "And here's the activities schedule," Miss Patel said brightly, handing me a laminated sheet. "We have bingo on Tuesdays, crafts on Thursdays, and a movie night every Saturday." I nodded, playing the role of the compliant elderly mother. "Sounds lovely." "Well," Margaret said, checking her watch after barely 15 minutes, "we should get going. James has a shift at the hospital, and I need to meet the estate agent at your house to discuss listings." "No time wasted," I thought bitterly. "Before you go," I said mildly, "could we have Ms. Patel witness something? I've prepared a document that I'd like to sign." Margaret frowned. "What document?" I removed an envelope from my purse. "Just something my attorney prepared. A formality, really." "Your attorney?" Her voice sharpened. "What attorney?" "Charles Livingston," I replied, enjoying the flicker of alarm that crossed her face. "He thought it would be best to have proper paperwork, given my memory issues." Ms. Patel looked between us, clearly sensing tension. "I'd be happy to witness a signature if needed." I opened the envelope and removed a single sheet of paper. "This simply states that I, Evelyn Ellis, being of sound mind, at least for the moment." I allowed myself a small, ironic smile. "I am voluntarily entering Sunny Pines Retirement Home and relinquishing my property at 1542 Maple Street to my daughter Margaret for management during my residence here." Margaret visibly relaxed. "Of course, Mom. That's sensible." I signed with a flourish, then handed the pen to Ms. Patel, who added her signature as witness. "Excellent," I said, handing the paper to Margaret. "Now everything's in order. You and Sophia can proceed with the house as planned." Margaret tucked the document into her purse without reading it carefully. If she had, she might have noticed the additional clause. This arrangement shall remain in effect for a period not to exceed 30 days, after which all previous guardianship orders are contested as fraudulently obtained. We'll call to check on you, Margaret promised, already heading for the door. I'm sure you will, I repeated, watching them leave without a backward glance. Phase 1 of my plan was complete. Now I had 30 days to prepare for Phase 2. I spent my first week at Sunny Pines observing. The facility operated like a well-oiled machine designed to process human beings rather than care for them. Meals arrived at exactly the same time. Each day, bland, soft foods that required minimal chewing. Activities were conducted with the forced cheer of adults managing children. Medication rounds happened with military precision, whether you needed your pills or not. Most disturbing was how quickly the staff categorized residents. The sharp ones were given minimal supervision and treated with a modicum of respect. The confused ones were spoken about in third person even while present in the room. The difficult ones were subtly isolated, their call buttons answered. Last, I made sure to be categorized among the sharp ones. You have quite a financial background, Nurse Gladys commented on my third day as she checked my blood pressure. Ms. Patel mentioned you worked for Montgomery Investments? I did, I confirmed, watching the numbers on the digital monitor. For over 40 years. My son is trying to save for college, she continued. Any tips for a single mom on a nurse's salary? I spent the next 15 minutes outlining basic investment strategies tailored to her situation. By that evening, 3 other staff members had casually asked my advice on their 401ks or debt consolidation plans. I happily obliged. Building allies among the staff was part of my strategy. Margaret called exactly once that first week, brief conversation that consisted mainly of her explaining why she couldn't visit yet. Some emergency at the hospital. Sophia busy with apartment showings at my house. How many showings have there been? I asked innocently. Oh, quite a few, Margaret replied vaguely. Your neighborhood has become very desirable. The realtor thinks we might get offers above asking price. How wonderful, I said, matching her tone. And what asking price did you settle on? A pause. We're listing at $685,000. Paul thought we might get as much as $750,000 with the right buyer. The house I'd paid off 30 years ago, worth less than $200,000 then, was now being sold for $750,000. Money that would, according to Margaret's plan, mostly go toward my care at Sunny Pines, with whatever remained eventually passing to her and Michael as inheritance. If things had gone according to her plan, that is. By the second week, I had made friends with 2 other residents. Leonard, a retired history professor with a wicked sense of humor, and Iris, a former civil rights attorney who had been deposited at Sunny Pines by children similarly, eager to access her assets. It's the same story everywhere, Iris told me over a game of chess in the common room. Children who can't wait for their inheritance. I fought it at first, but my energy isn't what it once was. I'm sorry, I said, genuinely moved by the resignation in her voice. She shrugged, moving her bishop with precision despite her arthritic hands. I've made my peace with it. My daughter gets my house, and I get to spend my remaining years playing terrible bingo games and eating overcooked vegetables. What if you had an alternative? I asked cautiously. Iris looked up sharply, her legal mind still clearly functioning at full capacity. What kind of alternative? I glanced around to ensure we weren't overheard. The kind that might teach them a lesson while giving us back our autonomy. Her eyes lit up with a spark I suspected had been long dormant. Tell me more. By the end of the second week, my circle of confidants had grown to include Iris, Leonard, and 2 staff members, Nurse Gladys and Hector, the van driver who transported residents to medical appointments. All had signed the non-disclosure agreements Charles Livingston had prepared. On day 15, exactly halfway through my self-imposed sentence at Sunny Pines, I received my first visitor who wasn't family. Harriet Chen arrived at precisely 2 p.m., dressed in an impeccable charcoal suit and carrying a leather portfolio. "My favorite client," she greeted me warmly, embracing me before sitting in the room's single visitor chair. "How are you holding?" "Up, counting the days," I admitted. "But making progress. How are things proceeding on your end?" Harriet opened her portfolio. "Everything is in place. The properties have been secured, the accounts are set up exactly as you specified, and the trust documentation is complete." She handed me several documents requiring signatures. "Once you sign these, the pieces can start moving into position." Reviewed each page carefully before signing. One does not work in financial management for 4 decades without developing the habit of reading the fine print. "And the other matter?" I asked, referring to the investigation into the forged guardianship. "Documents. Proceeding quietly," Harriet assured me. "Charles has compiled substantial evidence but is holding off on filing anything until you give the word. The detective he hired has also uncovered some interesting financial transactions from Margaret's accounts. Large payments to a Dr. Reynolds, the same doctor who signed your cognitive evaluation." I felt a pang despite everything. My own daughter had paid a doctor to falsify reports about my mental capacity. The betrayal cut deep, but it also reinforced my resolve. 15 more days, I said firmly. Then we move forward with everything, simultaneously. After Harriet left, I found Iris waiting for me in the common room, a knowing look on her face. "Important business meeting?" she asked, setting up the chessboard. "Very important," I confirmed, taking my seat across from her. "How would you feel about a change of scenery in the near future?" She moved her first pawn with a flourish. "At my age, any change is welcome, especially one that wipes the smug smile off my daughter's face." On day 21, Margaret and James finally visited. They arrived during afternoon activities, finding me in the middle of a surprisingly competitive bingo game. "Mom," Margaret called, her voice carrying that false brightness people often use with the elderly or very young. "Look who came to see." "You?" I excused myself from the game, noticing how Iris subtly watched the interaction while marking her bingo card. "Margaret, James, what a surprise." I led them to a seating area near the windows, away from the other residents. "You look well," Margaret commented, studying me with what appeared to be genuine surprise. "The staff says you're adjusting nicely." "They take good care of me here," I replied neutrally. James scrolled through his phone, barely paying attention until Margaret elbowed him. "Oh yeah, Grandma, you look great. Hey, I wanted to ask, have you seen those old investment certificates that used to be in your desk? The Montgomery ones?" So that was the real purpose of their visit. Not concern for my welfare, but hunting. For financial documents. "I believe those went into storage with my other papers," I said vaguely. "Why do you ask?" James and Margaret exchanged a glance. "Just trying to make sure all your affairs are in order," Margaret said smoothly. "The house is under contract, by the way. The new owners are offering $735,000, and they want to close quickly." "How fortunate," I commented. "And the proceeds?" "After paying for Sunny Pines, we'll invest the rest for your future needs," Margaret assured me, the lie flowing effortlessly. "Speaking of which, we should probably go through your old financial records soon, just to make sure everything's organized." "Of course," I agreed pleasantly. "Perhaps next time you visit." They stayed for exactly 35 minutes, just long. Enough to ask about any other investments or accounts I might have, thinly disguised as concern for my financial well-being. When they left, Iris joined me by the window. "Vultures circling?" she asked dryly. "Looking for scraps they've missed," I confirmed. 9 more days. The next week passed in a blur of preparations. Nurse Gladys helped me arrange a special outing, claiming it was for a dental appointment. Instead, I met with Charles, Harriet, and their team for final coordination. By day 29, everything was ready. I packed my 2 suitcases again, this time with a lighter heart. I left a sealed envelope for Ms. Patel with instructions to open it the following morning. On day 30, at precisely 10 a.m., I walked out the front doors of Sunny Pines retirement home, got into the car Hector had arranged, and left my old life behind. Phase 2 was complete. Now it was time for the real revelation. The auction for my house took place exactly 1 week after my departure from Sunny Pines. I watched it unfold from the comfort of the executive suite at the Grand Hotel downtown, where I had taken temporary residence while my new home was being prepared. Charles Livingston sat beside me, his tablet displaying a live stream of the proceedings. Margaret and Paul stood on my former front lawn, champagne flutes in hand, while potential buyers milled about. Sophia was directing people inside for viewings, her law school poise on full display. "They look rather celebratory for people selling their elderly mother's lifelong home," Charles observed dryly. "They believe I'm safely warehoused and unaware," I replied, watching as Margaret laughed at something a prospective buyer said. The auction was her idea. Create a bidding war, drive up the price. "Well, they're about to get quite a surprise," Charles said, checking his watch. "Mr. Fujimoto should be arriving any minute." Right on cue, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Akira Fujimoto, a distinguished man in his 60s and one of Walter's oldest friends, stepped out, accompanied by a younger man carrying a briefcase. "Still can't believe he agreed to this," I said, watching as Akira approached Margaret with a polite bow. "Walter's friends were quite fond of you," Charles reminded me. "Mr. Fujimoto said he was honored to play a role in what he called a masterclass in justice." On screen, I could see Margaret's expression shift from polite greeting to intense interest as Akira introduced himself as a representative of Osaka Investment Group. The buyers I had arranged were making their entrance. The auction proceeded with artificial enthusiasm, with Margaret and the real estate agent they'd hired building excitement among the legitimate buyers. The starting bid of $735,000 quickly climbed to $780,000, then $800,000. Akira remained silent until the bidding reached $825,000. "$850,000, he announced calmly, his accented voice carrying authority. A flurry of bidding pushed the price to $875,000. Akira countered with $900,000, silencing most of the competition. Only one other bidder remained, a young couple who appeared to be stretching their budget. $925,000, the husband offered hesitantly. Akira nodded respectfully at them before turning to the auctioneer. $1 million. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Margaret's face transformed with naked greed. The young couple shook their heads, defeated. "Going once, going twice. Sold to the gentleman from Osaka Investment Group," the auctioneer announced. Triumphantly. Margaret practically floated across the lawn to shake Akira's hand, with Paul close behind. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I could imagine the dollar signs dancing in their eyes. "Time for the next phase?" Charles asked. "Closing the live stream. Not quite yet," I replied. "Let's give them a taste of victory first. Let them celebrate tonight." I knew exactly how the next few hours would unfold. Margaret and Paul would take the Osaka representatives to dinner, probably at that overpriced steakhouse Paul favored. They would make a show of reluctance about selling my beloved home while eagerly discussing closing dates. Akira would suggest an expedited process, perhaps even offer a bonus for immediate vacancy. Margaret would graciously agree, all according to plan. The following morning, I positioned myself in the hotel restaurant at precisely 9 a.m. Charles sat at a nearby table, pretending to read a newspaper while actually recording everything on his phone. At 9:15, Margaret and Paul walked in, right on schedule. My daughter had dressed in her most expensive outfit, the Burberry coat I'd never been able to afford for her. Louboutin heels announcing her arrival with distinctive clicks across the marble floor. The maître d' directed them to a table across, from mine, partially obscured by a decorative plant. They didn't notice me, too absorbed in their celebratory mood. $1 million, I heard Margaret say, barely containing her glee. I never imagined we'd get that much. Even after the nursing, home fees, we'll clear at least $600,000. We should consider investing in that vacation property in Aspen, Paul suggested. The one we looked at last year. Perfect timing, Margaret agreed. Mom's safely settled, the house is sold for way above market value, and we'll have the down payment by next month. What about Michael's share? Paul asked, lowering his voice. Margaret waved dismissively. He agreed to 20% since we're doing all the work. That still leaves plenty for Aspen. I had heard enough. I signaled to Charles, who stopped recording and texted Harriet. Everything was unfolding as predicted. I stood up and walked, slowly toward their table, timing my arrival just as their coffee was being served. The Aspen property market is quite volatile, I said conversationally, stopping beside them. I'd recommend looking at Sedona instead. Better long-term appreciation. Margaret froze, coffee cup halfway to her lips. Paul's mouth dropped open comically. Mom, Margaret finally managed. How did you get out of Sunny Pines? I finished for her, pulling out a chair and sitting down uninvited. It wasn't difficult, I simply walked out. But that's not... You can't just... She sputtered, looking around frantically as if expecting nursing home staff to appear and collect me. Actually, I can, I replied calmly. You see, the guardianship papers you forged have been invalidated. The retirement documents you fabricated have been reported to the authorities. And the sale of my house that you were just celebrating? Not legally binding. The blood drained from Margaret's face. Paul began to stand, but Charles chose that moment to approach, placing a gentle but firm hand on his shoulder. I wouldn't recommend leaving just yet, he advised, showing his credentials. There's rather a lot to discuss. Who are you? Margaret demanded, finding her voice. Charles Livingston, elder law attorney, he replied pleasantly. I represent your mother. This is ridiculous, Margaret said, attempting indignation. Mom has dementia. She's confused. That's why she's in Sunny Pines. Interesting theory, I said. Unfortunately for you, 3 separate neurological evaluations conducted over the past month confirm I'm perfectly competent. The doctor you paid to falsify my cognitive assessments, however, is now cooperating with authorities to avoid losing his medical license permanently. Margaret's carefully constructed facade cracked. You don't understand, she insisted, her voice taking on a desperate edge. We were trying to protect you. You've been making poor decisions. Like not giving you access to my money? I interrupted. That seems to be the only decision you actually objected to. That's not fair, she protested weakly. What's not fair, Charles interjected, is committing elder fraud, forging medical and legal documents, and attempting to sell property you don't own. Those actions constitute several felonies. Paul, always quick to save himself, turned to Margaret. You told me she had signed the property over willingly. You said the guardianship was legitimate. The blame game had begun, exactly as predicted. I think, I said, rising from the table, you both have a lot to discuss. Charles will provide you with the details of what happens next. I have a meeting with your buyer, Mr. Fujimoto, to thank him for his assistance. What do you mean, his assistance? Margaret asked, dread dawning in her eyes. Akira is an old friend, I explained. He was never going to buy the house. He was merely helping me establish exactly what you plan to do with the proceeds. I smiled thinly. $1 million for a vacation home in Aspen, with only 20% to your brother. That's valuable information for the upcoming legal proceedings. As I walked away, I heard Margaret begin to cry. Not tears of remorse, but of frustration and anger at being caught. The sound should have satisfied me, perhaps even pleased me. Instead, it only deepened the hollow ache in my chest. My own daughter, willing to lock me away for money I'd never even told her about. What had I done wrong as a mother to create such a child? The meeting with Akira Fujimoto took place in the hotel's private dining room. Iris and Leonard were already waiting when I arrived, both dressed in their finest clothes, Iris in a tailored pantsuit that belied her 83 years, Leonard in a tweed jacket with leather elbow patches that perfectly matched his academic background. "The look on your daughter's face must have been priceless," Iris said as I took my seat. "I wish I could have witnessed it." "Charles recorded it," I replied, feeling more exhaustion than triumph. "Though I find I don't particularly want to watch it." Akira arrived moments later, bowing respectfully before taking his seat. "Mrs. Ellis, your plan worked perfectly. Your daughter and son-in-law were completely convinced of my interest in purchasing your property." "Thank you for your help," I said, genuinely grateful. "Walter always spoke highly of your integrity. Now I understand why." Akira nodded, accepting the compliment with quiet dignity. Walter was a man who recognized the true value of relationships over transactions, a lesson your daughter unfortunately failed to learn. The reminder of Margaret's betrayal stung, but I pushed the pain aside. Today wasn't about dwelling on betrayal, but about moving forward. "Have you told them yet?" Leonard asked, adjusting his glasses. "About the other part?" "Not yet," I admitted. "I wanted to establish the fraud first. The inheritance revelation comes next." Harriet Chen arrived, completing our small gathering. The waitstaff served lunch, a welcome change from Sunny Pines' bland offerings, while we discussed the next stages of what Leonard had jokingly dubbed Operation Retirement Revolution. "The paperwork for Magnolia Haven is complete," Harriet informed us, referencing the property I had purchased. "Construction crews finish the renovations next week, and the staff hiring is nearly complete." "And the legal structure?" I asked. "The trust is established with the parameters you specified. Each resident will have full autonomy within the financial side. Framework we discussed." Iris leaned forward. "And you're certain there's room for both Leonard and me?" "The East Wing has 6 private suites," I confirmed, each with separate living areas, bedrooms, and kitchenettes, plus access to the common areas, library, garden, and dining room. You'll have both privacy and community." "Sounds like heaven compared to Sunny Pines," Leonard remarked. "Though I'll miss Wednesday night bingo. Gladys always slips me extra cards." "Gladys has accepted the position of head nurse," Harriet informed him with a smile. "She starts next month." Our planning session continued through lunch, finalizing details of what would become a very different kind of retirement community, one built on respect, autonomy, and shared governance. Walter's inheritance was making possible not just my escape from Sunny Pines, but a complete reimagining of what elder living could be. As coffee was served, my phone rang. Michael's name flashed on the screen. I had been expecting this call since my confrontation with Margaret. "Excuse me," I said to my companions. "I need to take this." I stepped into the hotel corridor, bracing myself before answering. "Hello? Michael?" "Mom, what the hell is going on?" His voice was tight with anger. "Margaret's hysterical, saying you've got lawyers involved and you're pressing charges? She said you tricked them about the house sale?" I leaned against the wall, suddenly weary. Did she mention forging medical documents to have me declared incompetent? Or filing fraudulent guardianship papers? Or planning to use the proceeds from my house for a vacation property in Aspen? A pause. "She said they were trying to protect you because you've been confused lately." "I'm not confused, Michael. I'm angry. Your sister committed elder fraud to gain control of my assets. She would have left me in that nursing home indefinitely while she profited from my property." "That can't be right," he protested, but with less conviction. "Margaret wouldn't—" "She did," I interrupted. "I have proof. Recordings, documented forgeries, witnesses. Even her co-conspirators are turning on her to save themselves." Another long silence. Then, in a smaller voice, "Why, Didn't you call me when this started? I could have helped. The question carried a hint of the son I remembered. The sensitive boy who had always mediated family conflicts, who had seemed more attuned to others' feelings than his twin sister. Would you have believed me over Margaret? I asked quietly. When she told you I needed to be in Sunny Pines, did you question it at all? His silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, I continued, without accusation. You trusted her judgment because she's a doctor, because she was here and you weren't. I understand that, Michael. So what happens now? He asked, sounding lost. Are you really going to press charges against Margaret? The question I had been wrestling with for weeks. The legal case was solid, the evidence overwhelming. Justice demanded consequences for what Margaret had done. But she was still my daughter. I haven't decided, I admitted. But regardless of what happens legally, things have changed permanently. I won't be returning to Sunny Pines. I won't be living in the family home. And I certainly won't be turning over control of my finances to anyone else. Where will you go? Michael asked, concern finally entering his voice. I've purchased a property, I said simply. I'm establishing a different kind of retirement community, one based on dignity and self-determination. With what money? He asked, confusion evident. Margaret said your pension barely covered Sunny Pines. Here it was, the moment to reveal what Margaret had suspected, but never confirmed. Walter Montgomery left me his fortune when he died, I said quietly. $24 million and controlling interest in Montgomery investments. The silence on the other end was profound. 24 million? Michael finally managed. Yes. That's what Margaret was really after, though she never found proof of it. Just hints and suspicions. And you never told us? A note of hurt entered his voice. I was planning to surprise you all, I explained. I wanted to help with the grandchildren's education, maybe take the family on a vacation together. But before I could announce it, Margaret had me declared incompetent and locked away. Oh, God, Michael whispered, the implications sinking in. Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have known something wasn't right. His apology, seemingly genuine, loosened something tight in my chest. You're not the one who needs to apologize, Michael. What can I do now? He asked. How can I make this right? Come see me, I said, making a sudden decision. Not today, but tomorrow. There's someone I want you to meet, and a place I want to show you. After ending the call, I returned to the private dining room where my new friends waited patiently. Their faces showed concern but not intrusion, a courtesy often denied to the elderly. Everything all right? Iris asked gently. Getting there, I replied, rejoining them at the table. That was my son Michael. He's coming tomorrow to see Magnolia Haven. Leonard raised his eyebrows. Are you considering reconciliation? I considered the question carefully. With Michael, perhaps. He wasn't directly involved in the fraud, just complicit through inaction. With Margaret, I shook my head. Some betrayals cut too deep for simple forgiveness. And the legal charges? Harriet inquired. I'm still deciding, I admitted. Part of me wants justice. Another part recognizes that criminal charges would permanently sever whatever remains of our relationship. Whatever you decide, we'll support. You, Iris said firmly. That's what real family does. Her words warmed me. In the space of a month, these people had shown me more genuine care and respect than my daughter had in years. Perhaps family wasn't always defined by blood. As our meeting concluded and we prepared to go our separate ways until the move to Magnolia Haven, Leonard pulled me aside. I've been thinking about what you said, about teaching them a lesson rather than just punishing them, he said thoughtfully. Perhaps there's a middle path between pressing charges and letting it go entirely. What do you have in mind? I asked. His eyes twinkled mischievously behind his glasses. It involves your inheritance, public acknowledgement of what they did, and a rather poetic form of justice. As he outlined his idea, I felt the first real smile in weeks spread across my face. It was perfect, neither vengeful nor naive, but instructive in a way Margaret might actually understand. "Leonard," I said when he finished, "I believe you've just earned yourself the corner suite at Magnolia Haven." Magnolia Haven exceeded even my expectations. The former country estate sat on 12 acres of rolling hills just outside the city limits, its brick facade and white columns reminiscent of a bygone era. Behind the main house, 6 separate cottages nestled among mature oak trees, each offering privacy while remaining part of the community. As the car pulled through the wrought iron gates, I felt a sense of coming home. Strange, considering I'd only visited twice during the renovation process. Perhaps it was simply the knowledge that this place was truly mine, created according to my vision rather than someone else's idea of what was appropriate for my age. Harriet accompanied me on this first official visit, clipboard in hand as we toured the completed renovations. "The main house has been divided into 8 private suites as you requested," she explained, leading me through the grand foyer where fresh flowers brightened antique tables. The original library and dining room remain common spaces. The east wing houses the medical suite, small but fully equipped for routine care. Unlike Sunny Pines' institutional aesthetic, Magnolia Haven maintained the character of a well-loved home. The walls were painted in warm colors, the furniture chosen for both beauty and accessibility. No beige, no plastic plants, no patronizing artwork. "It's perfect," I said, pausing by a window that overlooked the garden where landscapers were installing raised beds for residents who wished to grow their own vegetables and flowers. "Walter would have approved." "He would have been proud," Harriet corrected gently. "This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking he valued." We continued our tour, inspecting each suite and cottage, confirming that the renovations met the standards we'd established. When finished, Magnolia Haven would accommodate 16 residents, each with their own private living space, but access to communal areas and services. "The staff quarters are ready as well," Harriet noted as we examined the converted carriage house. "Nurse Gladys has already chosen her apartment, and the chef starts next week." "What about security?" I asked, thinking of Margaret and the possibility she might try to interfere once she understood what I was creating. "State-of-the-art systems throughout the property," Harriet assured me. "Cameras at all entrances, key-card access to the main building, and a full-time security guard who'll live on site." The precautions were necessary, though it pained me to admit it. I no longer trusted my own daughter, a realization that still cut deep despite everything she'd done. As we concluded our tour, I stood on the main house's wide veranda, looking out over what would soon become a haven for people like me, Iris, and Leonard, seniors who valued independence but desired community, who refused to be warehoused or infantilized in their later years. "When can the first residents move in?" I asked. "The health department does a final inspection tomorrow," Harriet replied. "If all goes well, by the end of the week." Just in time for Michael's visit. I had arranged for him to come on Saturday, wanting him to see Magnolia Haven as it was meant to be, alive with its first residents, not just an empty building. The following days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Leonard and Iris arrived first, their faces lighting up as they explored their new homes. 4 other residents followed, all carefully selected from applications we'd quietly circulated among senior advocacy groups. Each had their own story, of family conflicts or institutional mistreatment, each bringing unique skills and perspectives to our intentional community. Dr. Eleanor Reed, a retired psychologist who had faced her own battle with a son trying to control her finances. Jorge Mendez, once a celebrated chef who had been relegated to eating pureed foods at his previous facility, despite having no swallowing difficulties. Marianne Wilson, a former librarian whose extensive book collection had been discarded when her children moved her to assisted living. And Howard Chen, Harriet's father, who had refused traditional retirement homes because they couldn't accommodate his cultural practices. By Friday evening, when we gathered for our first communal dinner, in the formal dining room, Magnolia Haven felt alive with possibility. Chef Paolo, rescued from a restaurant that had undervalued his talents due to his age, had prepared a feast that honored each resident's dietary preferences without compromising on flavor or presentation. To new beginnings, Leonard proposed, raising his glass of wine, real wine, not the watered-down version Sunny Pines occasionally served at special events. And to Evelyn, Iris added, for creating this sanctuary. I felt my cheeks flush with the unaccustomed praise. I simply had the means. You all are providing the community that makes it special. The evening continued with conversation flowing, as naturally as if we'd known each other for years. Plans were made for a garden committee, a library renovation project, and weekly film discussions curated by Howard, who had once taught cinema studies. As I retired to my suite that night, the one I'd selected in the West Wing, with views of both the sunset and the rose garden, I reflected on how quickly my life had transformed. 2 months ago, I had been declared incompetent, stripped of my autonomy, and abandoned in a facility where my preferences were irrelevant. Now, I was creating the future I wanted, surrounded by people who saw me as a whole person rather than a problem to be managed. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright. I dressed carefully for Michael's visit, choosing a silk blouse in deep blue, one of several new clothing items I'd purchased to replace the practical polyester I'd worn for decades. Nothing ostentatious, but quality pieces that reflected my newfound freedom to care about such things. I was drinking coffee on the veranda when Michael's car pulled up precisely at 10 o'clock. Always punctual. At least he'd maintained that quality from childhood. He emerged from his car slowly, his gaze traveling over the imposing facade of Magnolia Haven, the manicured grounds, the discreet but unmistakable security features. His expression registered surprise, then confusion, then something approaching awe. "Mom," he called, spotting me on the veranda. This is yours?" I descended the steps to greet him, accepting his awkward embrace. "Welcome to Magnolia Haven. Michael, would you like a tour?" His eyes continued to dart around, taking in details, the quality of the stonework, the antique benches positioned to catch morning light, the subtle ramp integrated into the stairs for accessibility without sacrificing aesthetics. "I don't understand," he said as I led him inside. "You said you'd purchased a property, but this is—" He gestured helplessly. "An estate." "It was more affordable than you might think," I replied mildly. "The previous owners were motivated sellers, and the renovations, while extensive, were efficiently managed." The main foyer impressed him visibly. The sweeping staircase, the crystal chandelier, the original artwork selected by Marianne for its calming properties. As we moved through the common areas, we encountered other residents going about their morning routines, Jorge experimenting in the kitchen, Eleanor arranging flowers in the library, Howard practicing Tai Chi on a sunny patch of lawn visible through the windows. "These are your friends?" Michael asked, watching Howard's graceful movements. "My community," I corrected gently. "Fellow residents of Magnolia Haven." His brow furrowed. "I don't understand. This isn't a normal retirement home." "No, it's not," I agreed, leading him to a quiet sitting room where Harriet had arranged for refreshments. "Please sit. There's a lot to explain." As we settled into comfortable chairs, Michael's gaze continued to take in his surroundings, recalibrating his understanding of his mother's circumstances with each new detail. The fine china cups, the fresh-baked pastries, the unmistakable quality of everything around us, all telling a story very different from the one Margaret had constructed. "Mom," he began hesitantly, "about what happened with Margaret." I raised a hand to pause him. "Before we discuss that, I want you to understand what I've created here. Magnolia Haven isn't just my new home. It's a model for what elder living can be when designed by the elders themselves. I explained the concept: a cooperative living arrangement where each resident maintained complete autonomy while benefiting from shared resources and community. No institutional rules, no infantilizing schedules, no assumption of decline. Everyone here has full decision-making capacity, I emphasized. We've created a legal structure that protects our rights while providing safeguards should any of us eventually need them. But those decisions will be made collectively, with dignity and respect. Michael listened intently, his legal mind clearly processing the implications. This is revolutionary, he finally said, and expensive. Yes, I acknowledged, which brings us to Walter Montgomery's inheritance. I took a sip of my tea, gathering my thoughts before explaining the inheritance that had triggered such drastic actions from Margaret. Walter Montgomery was more than my employer for 42 years, I began. He was my mentor, my friend, and ultimately my benefactor. When he died, he left me $24 million and controlling interest in Montgomery. Investments. Michael's teacup froze halfway to his lips. $24 million, he repeated, his voice hollow. And Margaret somehow found out? Not exactly, I explained. She found indications, papers related to the transfer of ownership shares, correspondence, from the estate attorneys. Enough to suspect, not enough to confirm. That's why she created the fiction about my mental decline. She wanted guardianship to access my financial records, to find what she believed was there. And instead of just asking you about it, Michael set his cup down carefully, as if afraid it might shatter in his suddenly unsteady hands. Instead of asking, she forged medical evaluations, filed fraudulent guardianship papers, and had me committed to a facility where I had no privacy, no autonomy, and no way to manage my own affairs. The bitterness I still felt crept into my voice despite my efforts to remain calm. Michael's face had gone pale. I should have questioned it more. When she called saying you needed to be in assisted living, I just assumed she knew best. She's a doctor. She was here. His voice trailed off, the excuses sounding hollow even to him. You trusted your sister, I acknowledged. As did I, until I was shown irrefutable evidence of what she'd done. What happens now? He asked, quietly. With the legal charges? Before I could answer, Harriet appeared at the door. I'm sorry to interrupt, Evelyn, but there's a situation at the gate. Margaret is here demanding to see you. My heart raced, despite my determination to remain composed. Is she alone? No, Harriet replied grimly. She has Paul with her and two people who appear to be from Sunny Pines, a woman in nursing scrubs and a man in an administrator's suit. They've come to try to take me back, I realized aloud. The audacity was breathtaking, even knowing what I now did about my daughter. Should I have security turn them away? Harriet asked, phone already in hand. I considered for a moment, then made a decision. No, I think it's time for a direct confrontation. Let them in, but have security present, and make sure the cameras are recording. Michael stood. Mom, are you sure? Margaret seems desperate. This could get ugly. It's already ugly, Michael. But hiding won't resolve anything. I smoothed my silk blouse, squared my shoulders, and nodded to Harriet. Show them to the main sitting room. Let's give them the full Magnolia Haven experience. As Harriet left, to relay instructions, Michael touched my arm gently. I'll stand with you, whatever happens. His support meant more than I could express. Thank you. We waited in the grand sitting room, a space designed for formal gatherings, with its antique furniture, crystal chandelier, and impressive artwork. I chose to sit in the wingback chair positioned like a throne at the head of the seating arrangement. Not out of arrogance, but strategy. Let Margaret see me in a position of power and dignity, not as the diminished figure she had cast me as. We heard them before we saw them. Margaret's voice raised in indignation, demanding to know what kind of facility this was and who was in charge. When they entered the room, their faces registered comical shock. Margaret froze mid-sentence, her gaze darting from me in my elegant chair to the opulent surroundings, to Michael standing supportively beside me. Paul lingered hesitantly at the threshold, while the Sunny Pines staff remained awkwardly in the background. "Mother?" Margaret finally managed, her voice unnaturally high. "What is this place? What are you doing here?" "This is Magnolia Haven," I replied calmly. "My new home and the retirement community I've established. But I suspect the more pressing question is, what are you doing here, Margaret? And why have you brought staff from Sunny Pines with you?" She recovered quickly, professional mask sliding into place. "We've been worried sick about you. You disappeared from Sunny Pines without notification. Ms. Patel here," she gestured to the woman in the administrative suit, "called to say you'd gone missing. We've been searching everywhere." "I wasn't missing," I corrected. "I left. Voluntarily. After the 30-day period specified in the document you so carelessly failed to read before putting it in your purse." Margaret's composure faltered momentarily. "What document? The one you had Ms. Patel witness? The one that stipulated I was entering Sunny Pines voluntarily for a period not to exceed 30 days, after which all guardianship orders would be contested as fraudulently obtained." Ms. Patel shifted uncomfortably. "I did try to tell you when you called, Dr. Hayes. Mrs. Ellis left a formal letter of departure. Everything was properly documented." Margaret shot her a venomous look before returning her attention to me. "Mom, I don't know what you think happened, but you're clearly confused. You had several small strokes last year. The doctors confirmed cognitive decline. That's why you need supervision." "That's a lie," I said evenly. "A fiction you created to gain control of my assets. The doctor who signed those evaluations has admitted to falsifying them at your request, in exchange for a significant payment." Paul took an involuntary step back, distancing himself both physically and symbolically from Margaret's schemes. That's absurd," Margaret sputtered, but her confidence was cracking. "Why would I do such a thing?" "Because you discovered indications of Walter Montgomery's inheritance," I replied. "Not enough to know details, but enough to suspect I had significant assets you couldn't access without guardianship." Her eyes widened slightly, confirmation that my assessment was correct. "And now," I continued, "rather than accepting that your plan failed, you've brought reinforcements to try to force me back into Sunny Pines. Even though I'm clearly competent, clearly well cared for, and clearly not interested in returning." "We're just concerned for your welfare," Margaret insisted, though her voice had lost its authoritative edge. "No," Michael interjected, speaking for the first time since they'd entered. "You're concerned about losing access to Mom's money. The house sale fell through, didn't it? Your buyer, Mr. Fujimoto, disappeared, and now you're desperate to regain control before the fraud charges become formal." Margaret turned on him, fury replacing calculation. "Oh, so now you're taking her side? After agreeing with me that she needed care? How convenient, Michael. Did she promise you a bigger cut than I offered?" The naked greed in her accusation silenced the room. Even Paul looked shocked at his wife's unfiltered admission. "There it is," I said softly. "The truth, finally. This was never about my welfare. It was about money. My money. Which you kept secret from your own children," Margaret shot back, abandoning all pretense. "Millions of dollars, and you never said a word. What kind of mother does that?" "The kind who wanted to surprise her family with generosity, not obligation," I replied, maintaining my composure despite the pain her words inflicted. "The kind who earned every penny through decades of hard work and loyalty. The kind who deserved to enjoy her retirement without being treated as a resource to be exploited." Margaret's face flushed with anger. "You have no idea the pressures. We're under. The cost of living, education for Sophia and James, maintaining our position in the community, all of which you expected me to subsidize, I interrupted, without even the courtesy of asking directly. Instead, you created an elaborate fraud to have me declared incompetent, locked me away in a facility where I was miserable, and planned to sell my home out from under me. Your own mother. The Sunny Pines nurse and administrator were inching toward the door, clearly wanting no part of this family confrontation now that they understood the true situation. You can leave, I told them kindly. I won't be returning to Sunny Pines. My residency there was based on fraudulent documents, as I believe your legal department has now been informed. They nodded gratefully and slipped out, leaving only my family in the grand sitting room, Margaret and Paul standing awkwardly before me, Michael at my side, and Harriet and a security guard observing discreetly from the doorway. So what happens? Now? Margaret finally asked, her voice smaller but still defiant. You press charges? Destroy my career? Is that your revenge? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with our shared history, with decades of love and sacrifice now tainted by betrayal. That, I said carefully, depends on what happens next. What happens next depends entirely on you, Margaret. I continued, maintaining the steady gaze I'd perfected over decades of financial negotiations, on whether you can acknowledge what you've done and take responsibility for it. Margaret's composure fractured further. Her eyes darted around the elegant room, taking in the antiques, the artwork, the undeniable evidence of wealth that had eluded her grasp. I was trying to protect you, she insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. No, I said quietly. You were trying to control me. There's a difference. Michael stepped forward, addressing his sister directly. I've seen the evidence, Margaret. The forged medical evaluations, the backdated guardianship papers, the financial transfers to Dr. Reynolds. It's all documented. A tense silence fell over the room. Paul had retreated to the doorway, physically distancing himself from his wife. The man had always known which way the wind was blowing. What do you want? Margaret finally asked, her voice small. I want what any mother wants, I replied. Honesty, respect, the acknowledgement that I am still capable of managing my own life. And the charges? She pressed, ever the pragmatist. That depends on several things, I said, nodding to Harriet, who stepped forward with a folder. We've prepared 2 options, Harriet explained, her professional demeanor unwavering. The first involves full legal proceedings for elder fraud, financial exploitation, and falsifying medical records. The second is a private resolution. Margaret's face paled. What kind of private resolution? One that acknowledges the harm done while creating a path forward, I said, taking the folder from Harriet and removing several documents. It requires a full admission of wrongdoing, signed and notarized, a legal agreement to relinquish all claims to my estate during my lifetime, and your participation in creating educational materials about elder abuse for medical professionals. You want me to admit to crimes on paper? Margaret asked incredulously. I want you to acknowledge the truth, I corrected. The document would remain private unless you violate its terms. Consider it both protection for me and an opportunity for redemption for you. She laughed bitterly. Redemption? You want to control me, just like you're accusing me of controlling you. No, Margaret, I said softly. I want to give you a chance to make amends without destroying your career or our family completely. The choice is yours. Public consequences or private accountability. Michael placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Mom has been more than fair, considering what you did. If it were me, I'm not sure I'd be offering any alternative to prosecution. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Of course you'd take her side now that you know she's worth millions. The accusation hung in the air, revealing more about Margaret's motivations than she perhaps intended. Actually, Michael replied calmly. I came here before I knew about the inheritance. I came because I was horrified by what you'd done to our mother. And what about my children? Margaret demanded, turning back to me, her voice rising. Your own grandchildren? Are you cutting them off too? I had anticipated this emotional appeal, her final leverage attempt. I've established education trusts. For all 4 of my grandchildren, I said. James, Sophia, Emma, and Tyler will each have their college expenses fully covered. Those trusts are irrevocable, regardless of your decision today. The fight seemed to drain from Margaret then, reality finally setting in. She sank onto one of the antique settees, her professional facade crumbling. I don't understand, she said, her voice barely audible. Why didn't you just tell us about the money? The question revealed so much about the gulf between us, a chasm I hadn't even recognized until recently. Because I wanted to see you, not for what I could give you, but for who I am, I replied simply. I wanted to be valued as your mother, not your bank. Tears welled in her eyes, though whether from genuine remorse or the realization of her miscalculation, I couldn't be sure. I need time to think, she said finally. Take it, I replied. The offer remains open for 48 hours. After that, my attorneys will proceed with the criminal complaints. Paul, sensing the meeting was concluding, stepped forward. Margaret, we should go. She stood, smoothing her expensive skirt with shaking hands. And what about you? Will you be living in this palace alone? I smiled for the first time since she'd entered. Not at all. Magnolia Haven has 8 residents already, with applications for the remaining suites. We're creating a community here, one based on respect and autonomy. As they turned to leave, I called out, Margaret. She paused, looking back. Regardless of what you decide, the children's trusts are secure. I meant what I said. I always wanted to help. I just wanted to be asked, not used. Something flickered across her face. Recognition, perhaps, of the magnitude of what she'd risked and lost in her quest for control. After they departed, Michael sat beside me, taking my hand. Are you all right? I considered the question carefully. I will be. This isn't how I imagined spending my retirement years, establishing boundaries with my own daughter. But it's necessary. And the community you're building here, he gestured, around at Magnolia Haven. This is remarkable, Mom. I had no idea you had this vision. I smiled, feeling a weight lifting. Neither did I, until recently. That's what Margaret never understood. There's still so much life to be lived at my age, so many possibilities. 3 months passed swiftly at Magnolia Haven. Summer eased into autumn, painting our grounds in brilliant hues of red and gold. What had begun as an emergency escape plan had blossomed into something remarkable. A vibrant community where each resident contributed their unique talents and perspectives. Leonard had established a philosophy salon that met weekly in the library, attracting participants from beyond our walls, professors emeritus from the local university, authors and thinkers who valued the wisdom that only decades of living could provide. Iris had revitalized our legal protections, establishing a robust framework that other senior communities were now requesting guidance on implementing. As for me, I found myself in an unexpected role as an advocate. After a local newspaper ran a feature on Magnolia Haven, Reimagining Retirement, How One Woman's Vision is Changing Elder Living, the requests began pouring in. Invitations to speak at senior centers, consulting requests from progressive retirement communities, even an inquiry from a state legislator about advising on elder protection laws. Michael visited regularly, bringing his children Emma and Tyler for weekend stays. They seemed to genuinely enjoy Magnolia Haven, especially Chef Paulo's cooking and Howard's Tai Chi lessons. Their presence brought life and laughter to our community, bridging the generational divide that too often isolates older adults. Margaret, had chosen the private resolution option, signing the admission of wrongdoing and agreement to relinquish claims on my estate. Whether motivated by legal self-preservation or genuine remorse remained unclear. She had begun creating the educational materials on elder abuse as required, though our personal relationship remained distant and formal. Her children, James and Sophia, visited occasionally, awkwardly at first, but gradually finding comfort in the neutral territory of Magnolia Haven. I was reviewing applications for our last available suite when Harriet arrived for our monthly business meeting, her expression unusually grave. "We have a situation," she announced without preamble, placing a thick folder on my desk. "Montgomery Investments is facing a hostile takeover attempt. Walter's nephew Carlton is trying to leverage your shares." I frowned, opening the folder to scan the documents inside. "How?" "I maintain controlling interest." "He's challenging the validity of Walter's bequest," Harriet explained, claiming Walter wasn't competent when he changed his will. Sound familiar? Aye. Irony wasn't lost on me. "He's using the same tactic Margaret tried." "Yes, but with more resources and legal firepower. He's filed motions to freeze your shares until competency hearings can be conducted, posthumously for Walter and currently for you." A chill ran through me. "He wants me declared incompetent to manage the company?" "Exactly. And he's using Margaret's guardianship filing as evidence, claiming that while it was withdrawn, the underlying concerns were valid." "But those documents were proven fraudulent," I protested. "Yes, but in our private resolution, we didn't create public record of the fraud. The court records simply show the guardianship petition was withdrawn." I realized the implications immediately. "So he's using my own mercy toward Margaret against me." Harriet nodded grimly. "Carlton has scheduled a shareholders' meeting for next Friday. He intends to force a vote on leadership, arguing that your absence from company operations since inheriting suggests inability to manage your interests. But I've been receiving all the reports, reviewing all major decisions," I said, gesturing to the neatly organized business files on my desk. "Yes, but mostly through me as intermediary. You haven't physically appeared at the company since Walter's death." I sat back, contemplating this challenge. Carlton had identified my vulnerability, my desire for privacy after the inheritance, my focus on creating Magnolia Haven rather than asserting my role at Montgomery Investments. "What are our options?" I asked, already knowing the answer, but needing to hear it confirmed. "You need to appear at that shareholders' meeting," Harriet said firmly. "You need to demonstrate unequivocally that you are capable, engaged, and rightfully in control." The thought was intimidating. While I had managed finances brilliantly for decades, I had always operated behind the scenes, supporting Walter rather than taking center stage. Now I would need to command a room full of financial executives, many of whom might question a 78-year-old woman's capability simply because of her age. "There's more," Harriet continued reluctantly. "Carlton has reached out to Margaret." My blood ran cold. "For what purpose?" "He's offering to testify about your cognitive decline based on her initial claims. If she cooperates, he's promising her a position on the board after he gains control." The betrayal cut deep, even after everything that had happened. "Do you think she'll do it?" Harriet hesitated. "I don't know. The agreement she signed would be violated if she makes any claims about your competence, but Carlton is offering significant compensation." I stood and walked to the window, watching residents enjoying the autumn gardens. Iris reading on a bench, Jorge harvesting late herbs for dinner, Leonard deep in conversation with one of our newer residents. This peaceful community I'd created could be threatened if Montgomery Investments fell into Carlton's hands. The foundation of Magnolia Haven was financial independence, mine and, by extension, my residents. Turning back to Harriet, I made my decision. Schedule a meeting with the company executives before the shareholders gathering. I need to reacquaint myself with everyone, demonstrate my engagement, and prepare a complete briefing on all current projects and financial positions. And Margaret? Harriet asked. Let's find out where she stands, I replied. Invite her here, tomorrow. This is her final test. To choose integrity over opportunity, truth over financial gain. And if she fails that test, then she'll trigger the consequences laid out in our agreement, I said firmly. I gave her a chance at redemption. What she does with it is her choice. As Harriet departed to make arrangements, I realized this confrontation represented everything Magnolia Haven stood against. The assumption that age equated to incompetence, that seniors could be manipulated and controlled, that our autonomy was conditional rather than absolute. This wasn't just about protecting my inheritance anymore. It was about standing up for every resident of Magnolia Haven, for every senior facing dismissal and diminishment. It was about proving that at 78, I wasn't finished contributing, leading, or fighting for what was right. Margaret arrived at Magnolia Haven at 10 a.m. I received her in my private study. This conversation required intimacy rather than the power, dynamics of our previous confrontation. Mom, she greeted me, taking the offered seat. Your message said it was urgent. It is, I confirmed. Carlton Montgomery has contacted you about testifying regarding my competency. Her surprise seemed genuine. How did you know that? Montgomery Investments has excellent intelligence resources, I replied. What I don't know is how you responded to his offer. I haven't decided yet. I see, I said quietly. So you're considering violating our agreement, betraying me again, but with full awareness of the consequences. It's not that simple, she protested. Carlton is offering a board position, significant compensation. He says he'll modernize the company, expand into healthcare investments. And all you have to do is declare your elderly mother incompetent, I finished. A small price for advancement. Margaret flinched. That's not fair. I opened a drawer and removed a folder of photographs spanning nearly 5 decades. Margaret as a toddler, her graduation, wedding day, and the birth of her children. Our life, I said simply. The one we shared before money became more important than truth. I showed her the final image. Walter and me at the company's 40th anniversary celebration. Walter believed in me when others saw only a secretary. He valued my judgment and integrity. That's why he left me his company, not out of charity, but because he trusted me. Tomorrow, I'm addressing the Montgomery shareholders personally. The only question is whether you'll stand with Carlton, attempting to take what isn't yours, or whether you'll finally choose differently. If I testify for him, what happens? She asked. The consequences in our agreement would take effect immediately. Your fraud would become public. Your medical license would likely be reviewed. And if I don't? Then perhaps we begin rebuilding. What's been broken? Not with money. That path has proven disastrous, but with truth and the respect we both deserve. Margaret gazed out at the gardens where residents were gathering fallen leaves. You've created something remarkable here. Something more meaningful than a board position. Magnolia Haven isn't built on money alone, but on dignity, purpose, and connection, the very things Carlton would sacrifice for profit margins. The shareholders' meeting is tomorrow? She asked. At 2 p.m. I should prepare, she said, moving toward the door. Margaret, I called. Whatever you decide. I still have those education trusts for James and Sophia. Some things remain unconditional. A complex emotion crossed her face, perhaps the first genuine one I'd seen since this ordeal began. Thank you, Mom. Carlton's face drained of color as his planned coup collapsed. The board members exchanged glances, some concerned, others poorly concealing their amusement. These assessments are conclusive, Margaret continued, her professional authority now serving the truth rather than obscuring it. My mother is not only competent to manage her affairs in this company, but exceptionally qualified to do so. I felt a complex wave of emotions: pride in Margaret's choice, relief at the crisis averted, and quiet satisfaction at Carlton's evident dismay. "Thank you, Dr. Hayes," I said formally, before turning to address the assembled board and shareholders. "Gentlemen, ladies, I understand the concerns about absentee leadership. That ends today." For the next 40 minutes, I outlined my vision for Montgomery Investments. Not dramatic changes that would unsettle the company Walter had built, but thoughtful evolutions that honored his legacy while embracing future opportunities. I demonstrated intimate knowledge of our current portfolio, market positions, and talent needs. By the time I finished, even Carlton's closest allies were nodding in reluctant agreement. "I may be 78, I concluded, "but my experience is an asset, not a liability. I've weathered every financial crisis since 1970. I've seen market bubbles form and burst. I've watched investment fads come and go. That perspective, combined with the brilliant younger minds we employ, creates the perfect balance of innovation and stability." The shareholders' vote was decisive, 89% in favor of maintaining current leadership, with only Carlton and his most loyal supporters dissenting. As the meeting adjourned, board members approached to introduce themselves properly, no longer seeing me as Walter's secretary but as their rightful leader. Margaret waited quietly until the crowd thinned, then approached me with Michael. "Thank you," I said simply. She shook her head. "I should have done this months ago. I should never have—" "Let's not dwell on should-haves," I interrupted gently. "Today you chose integrity. That's what matters now." Outside the Montgomery building, as we stood in the autumn sunshine deciding where to have a celebratory dinner, I felt a profound sense of completion. The circle that had begun with betrayal had closed with redemption. Not perfect, not erasing the pain that had come before, but offering a path forward. "You know," Michael said thoughtfully as we walked toward the restaurant, "what you've created at Magnolia Haven could be expanded. There must be so many seniors who would benefit from that model." I smiled, thinking of the applications we'd received, far exceeding our capacity. "That's precisely what I've been considering. Montgomery Investments has significant real estate holdings that could be repurposed." Margaret looked at me with newfound respect. "You're planning to create more communities like Magnolia Haven?" "With some improvements based on what we've learned," I confirmed. "It turns out retirement is just the beginning of a new chapter, not the end of the story." As we entered the restaurant, the three of us together, fragile but healing, I realized that Walter's greatest gift hadn't been the money or the company. It had been the opportunity to discover my own strength, to create something meaningful, and ultimately, to write the final chapters of my life on my own terms. The fortune my grandchildren hadn't known about had changed everything, not because of the wealth itself, but because it had forced us all to confront hard truths about value, worth, and what it means to truly see another person. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.